The dust still hung in the desert air 3 days after the fire swept through Redemption Creek. Arizona Territory, 1887. What remained of the trading post stood like charred bones against the copper sunset, its skeletal frame a stark reminder of the mysterious blaze that had claimed 6 lives in a single night. Ayanna knelt beside the creek, her Apache hands cupping the murky water as she tried to wash away the soot that seemed permanently etched into her bronze skin. At 19, she had survived more tragedy than most, twice her age, but nothing had prepared her for the hatred burning in the eyes of every settler who looked upon her now. There she is. The shout cut through the evening stillness like a blade. The witch who brought the devil's fire, Sheriff Thomas Brennan, emerged from behind a cluster of mesquite trees, his weathered face hard as granite. Behind him followed a growing crowd of townspeople, their faces twisted with grief and rage. Martha Stevens clutched her husband's arm, her knuckles white as bone. She had lost her eldest son in the fire, and her tear-stained cheeks bore the tracks of 3 sleepless nights. "My boy died in those flames." Martha's voice cracked like dry wood, and she walks free while he's in the ground. Ayanna rose slowly, water dripping from her cupped hands. She understood their pain, had felt it herself when her own family perished in a cavalry raid 5 years prior. But understanding didn't shield her from the accusations, the pointing fingers, the whispered word that followed her like a shadow. "Which I lost people to," Ayanna said quietly, her English careful and precise. "Learned from the missionary school before it was burned down in another fit of territorial violence. The fire took Mr. Henderson. He was kind to me, kind to you." Sheriff Brennan spat into the dirt. "Henderson's dead because of your Apache devil magic." The crowd pressed closer, their anger a living thing that made the air thick and dangerous. Ayanna's heart hammered against her ribs, but she stood her ground. Running would only confirm their suspicions, and she had nowhere left to run anyway. "I helped fight the fire," she said, raising her hands to show the burns that blistered her. "Palms, I tried to save, you caused it." The accusation came from Jacob Mueller, the blacksmith, whose powerful arms were crossed over his barrel chest. "Everyone knows Apache can call fire from the spirits. You survived when good Christian folk died. That ain't natural." The logic was as twisted as barbed wire, but logic had little place in grief. Ayanna had learned that lesson when her own people blamed her for surviving the cavalry attack that killed her parents and siblings. Survivor's guilt was a burden she carried like stones in her chest. But it didn't make her a witch. A stone flew through the air, grazing her shoulder. Then another. The crowd was working itself into a frenzy, feeding off each other's pain and fear. Ayanna backed toward the creek, but the water was shallow and offered no escape. "String her up," someone shouted. "Make her pay." That's when the voice cut through the mob's roar like a church bell. On Sunday morning, deep, resonant, and utterly unafraid. "That's enough." The crowd turned as one to see Reverend Samuel Cross walking toward them with the measured stride of a man accustomed to facing down human darkness. At 42, he was tall and lean, his black coat dusty from travel, and his steel-gray eyes holding the kind of authority that came not from a badge or a gun, but from years of staring into the abyss of human nature and refusing to blink. "Reverend Cross," Sheriff Brennan said, his tone suddenly uncertain. "This don't concern the church, doesn't it?" Samuel's voice carried the quiet power of distant thunder. "A young woman about to be murdered by a mob. Seems exactly the kind of thing that concerns a man of God." He stepped between Ayanna and the crowd, his presence somehow making him seem larger than his actual frame. "I've seen the aftermath of the fire, investigated it myself. There's nothing supernatural about what happened, just a knocked-over oil lamp and dry wood." "She's Apache," Martha Stevens cried, her voice shrill with grief. "They traffic with demons." Samuel's eyes found hers, and his expression softened with genuine compassion. "Mrs. Stevens, I know your pain. I've buried my share of good people, but turning into the very savages we claim to be better than won't bring your boy back." The words hit like a physical blow. The crowd shifted uncomfortably, their bloodlust cooling under the preacher's steady gaze. But anger runs deeper than shame, and Jacob Mueller stepped forward, his fists clenched. "You weren't here when the fire started, preacher. You didn't see what we saw." "What did you see?" Samuel asked quietly. She was just standing there when we found her." Mueller's voice faltered slightly. In the middle of all that flame and smoke, not a hair singed. Tell me that's natural." Samuel glanced back at Ayanna, taking in her burned hands and soot-stained clothes for the first time. When he turned back to the crowd, his voice carried absolute certainty. "I see a young woman who risked her life trying to save others. The burns on her hands tell that story better than your fear ever could." The sun had nearly disappeared behind the mesa, painting the sky in shades of red that reminded everyone of the fire. In the growing darkness, the mob's courage began to waver. Without the harsh light of day to fuel their anger, doubts crept in like shadows. Sheriff Brennan cleared his throat. "Well, Reverend, what do you propose we do with her? Can't have her stirring up more trouble." Samuel was quiet for a long moment, and Ayanna held her breath. She had seen this pattern before, the moments when someone's fate hung in the balance, waiting for a single word to tip the scales toward mercy or destruction. "She'll come with me," Samuel said finally. "Stay at the church until we can figure out what's best." The announcement hit the crowd like a thunderclap. Several people started talking at once, their voices rising in protest. But Samuel raised his hand, and something in his demeanor silenced them all. "Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me directly," he said, his tone carrying an edge that suggested such a conversation might not go well for the complainer. Ayanna stared at this strange man who had just placed himself between her and certain death. She had met few white men willing to risk anything for an Apache woman, especially one branded with the mark of witchcraft. "Why?" she whispered, the word barely audible above the murmur of the dispersing crowd. Samuel looked at her with eyes that held their own shadows, their own ghosts, because someone has to stand between the darkness and the innocent. "Might as well be me." As the crowd reluctantly began to disperse, muttering threats and promises that this wasn't over, Ayanna found herself walking beside the preacher toward a small adobe church on the hill overlooking town. The building was simple and weathered, but light spilled from its windows like hope made visible. Behind them, the burned remains of the trading post stood sentinel in the desert night, a blackened reminder that in this harsh land, survival often depended on the kindness of strangers and the courage of those willing to stand against the mob. That the inside of Samuel's church was nothing like the grand cathedrals Ayanna had glimpsed in the missionaries' picture books. Simple wooden pews faced a modest altar, and the walls were adorned with handmade crosses rather than elaborate stained glass. But there was something peaceful about the space, a sense of sanctuary that had nothing to do with decoration and everything to do with purpose. "You can sleep in the back room," Samuel said, lighting an oil lamp that cast dancing shadows across the adobe walls. "It's not much, but it's clean and private." Ayanna followed him to a small chamber behind the altar, furnished with little more than a narrow bed, a washstand, and a wooden chair. After 3 nights sleeping in the desert scrub, it looked like a palace. "Thank you," she said, her voice still hoarse from smoke and exhaustion. "But they'll come back. Your people don't give up easy when they want blood." Samuel paused in the doorway, his expression thoughtful. "They're not my people. I've only been in Redemption Creek for 6 months myself, still something of an outsider. Then why risk it? Why help me?" The question hung between them like incense in the still air. Samuel was quiet for so long that Ayanna thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of old wounds. "I've seen what happens when good people do nothing in the face of evil. The cost is always higher than the price of standing up." He left her alone then, and Ayanna sank onto the simple bed, her body finally acknowledging its exhaustion. Through the small window, she could see the lights of Redemption Creek flickering like earthbound stars, each one representing someone who wanted her dead or gone. Sleep came fitfully, filled with nightmares of fire and angry faces. More than once, she woke to the sound of voices outside, groups of men talking in low, dangerous tones. But no one tried to break down the church door, and gradually she understood that Samuel's presence carried more weight in this community than she had realized. Dawn came with the sound of hammering. Ayanna rose and peered through the window to see Samuel working on repairs to the church's front steps, his coat discarded and his sleeves rolled up. The sight was oddly domestic, a reminder that even men of God had to deal with practical matters like broken wood and rusted nails. She found him in the small kitchen attached to the church, cooking eggs over a wood stove. He looked up as she entered, and she was struck again by his eyes gray as storm clouds, but not unkind. "Coffee's in the pot," he said without preamble. "Help yourself." Ayanna poured herself a cup, inhaling the rich aroma. Real coffee was a luxury she hadn't enjoyed in months. "You don't have to feed me. I can hunt, find my own food. For now, you're my guest." And I was raised to treat guests properly. They ate in companionable silence, the morning light streaming through the kitchen window and painting everything in shades of gold. It was the most peaceful meal Ayanna had eaten since before the fire, maybe longer. "Tell me about the night it happened," Samuel said eventually, his tone careful and non-accusatory. "What you remember." Ayanna set down her fork, her appetite suddenly gone. "You want to know if I really am a witch? I want to know the truth. Sometimes they're the same thing, sometimes they're not." The honesty in his voice surprised her. Most white men would have dismissed the possibility outright, calling it savage superstition. Be more to the world than what could be seen and measured. "I was working late at Henderson's store," Ayanna began slowly. "He let me stay in the back room in exchange for helping with inventory. Around midnight, I smelled smoke." She closed her eyes, remembering the acrid scent that had jolted her from sleep. Burning. The wind was fierce that night, pushing the flames toward the other structures. Did you see how it started? Henderson was in his office, going over the books. He always worked late when supply wagons came through. "I think, ... double quotes," she paused, the memory still painful. "I think he knocked over the oil lamp, reaching for something. Other buildings that burned, they were all downwind. Yes, and they were the oldest structures, dry as tinder." It spread so fast, Ayanna's voice grew quiet. "I tried to wake people, get them out, but some were already overcome by the smoke. Yet you survived relatively unharmed." There it was, the question that had condemned her in the eyes of the townspeople. Ayanna met his gaze steadily. "I know these desert winds. I know how fire moves. My people taught me to read such things. And that knowledge kept you alive while others perished." "Yes." The word came out as barely a whisper. Samuel was quiet for a long moment, considering, "Among my people, we'd call that wisdom, not witchcraft. But I suppose wisdom can look like magic to those who don't possess it." The sound of approaching horses interrupted their conversation. Through the window, Ayanna could see Sheriff Brennan riding up with 2 deputies, their faces grim with purpose. Behind them came a small crowd of townspeople, including Martha Stevens and Jacob Mueller. "Stay here," Samuel instructed, rising from the table. "Let me handle this." But Ayanna was already moving toward the back room. She had lived too long as a target to trust completely in anyone's protection, even a man who seemed genuinely kind. If things went badly, she wanted to be ready to run. From her hiding place, she could hear voices through the church walls tense, angry, demanding Samuel's. Responses were calm but firm, each word carefully chosen. The conversation went on for nearly an hour, voices rising and falling like a verbal storm. Finally, she heard the horses departing, followed by Samuel's footsteps. He appeared in the doorway of the back room, his expression troubled but not defeated. "What did they want?" Ayanna asked. "What they always want: simple answers to complicated problems. Someone to blame for their losses." Samuel sat heavily in the wooden chair, suddenly looking older than his years. "They've appointed themselves a committee to investigate the fire. They want to question you formally, and you told them no. I told them that as long as you're under the protection of this church, they'll treat you with the respect due any human being." That seemed to confuse them considerably. Ayanna felt a smile tug at the corner of her mouth. "You're not what I expected from a white preacher." "I'm not what most people expect," Samuel replied. "Probably why I keep ending up in places like Redemption Creek instead of some comfortable parish back east." The afternoon brought more steady stream of curious townspeople who found excuses to come by the church. Some claimed to need spiritual counsel, others wanted to discuss church business. But Ayanna could see them through the window, craning their necks for a glimpse of the witch their preacher was harboring. "They're watching," she told Samuel as he prepared for evening prayers. "Waiting for you to make a mistake." "Let them watch," he replied, straightening his collar. "Might do them some good to spend time in a house of worship, even if their motives are suspect." But Ayanna could see the strain in his shoulders, the way his jaw tightened when he thought she wasn't looking. Protecting her was costing him, and They both knew it. In a town this small, a preacher's reputation was everything. Lose the trust of the congregation, and both his calling and his livelihood would disappear. That evening, as Samuel conducted prayer service with a notably thin congregation, whilst he spoke of mercy, of the dangers of false judgment, of the courage required to stand for what was right, even when it was difficult. The words were clearly meant for his parishioners, a place that had been wounded and scarred by years of rejection and suspicion. Here was a man willing to risk everything for principles most people only talked about on Sundays. When the service ended and the last of the congregants had departed with sullen backward glances, Samuel found her in the kitchen washing dishes. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I need to be useful," Ayanna replied without looking up. "Standing idle makes me feel like a burden." "You're not a burden. Protection. The fact that others can't see that says nothing about you and everything about them." Ayanna turned to face him, studying this man who spoke of her worth as if it were a simple, undeniable fact. "Why did you really become a preacher?" Samuel was quiet for a moment, his eyes distant. "Because I spent too many years being the kind of man who needed a preacher's help, figured it was time to give back." The answer was cryptic, but Ayanna heard the pain beneath it, told wounds that had healed crooked, leaving scars that would never fully fade. She recognized that particular brand of hurt because she carried it herself. "We all have pasts," she said softly. "The question is what we do with them." Samuel met her eyes, and something passed between them, an understanding born of shared experience with darkness and the long, difficult journey toward light. In that moment, Ayanna realized that her protector carried his own ghosts, his own burden of survival and guilt. Outside, the wind howled across the desert, carrying with it the scent of sage and the promise of another harsh day to come. But inside the small church, unforgiving land, a moment of genuine human connection. It wouldn't be enough to save them from what was coming, but it would give them the strength to face it together. 3 weeks into her stay at the church, Ayanna had settled into a routine. She rose before dawn to help Samuel prepare for morning prayers, tended the small garden, and fell asleep to the sound of his scripture reading. The townspeople had grown accustomed to seeing her around the church grounds, remained suspicious. Sheriff Brennan made daily visits, ostensibly for safety, but really to remind Samuel that harboring the witch remained contentious. On a scorching Tuesday afternoon, everything changed. Ayanna was hanging laundry when she heard the commotion, shouts, hoofbeats, and a woman's terrified scream. She dropped the wet sheet and ran toward the disturbance. Little Sarah Martinez, barely 5 years old, had wandered into the path of a spooked Mustang. The horse reared wildly as the child cowered in the dust, too frightened to move. Her mother, Alina Martinez, stood frozen 20 feet away, face white with horror. The gathered crowd seemed paralyzed. Men shouted advice and women screamed, but no one moved to help. The horse was too unpredictable, too dangerous. Ayanna didn't think, she simply ran. Years with Apache horses had taught her their language, the subtle shifts, the meaning behind each sound. This Mustang wasn't vicious. It was terrified, separated from its herd, and disoriented by the town's chaos. She approached slowly, voice low and steady. The Mustang's breathing slowed. Something in her posture, her scent, her calm confidence spoke to its wild heart. She extended her hand slowly, letting the horse catch her full scent. When it didn't retreat, she stepped closer. "You remember us, don't you? Remember the old agreements between our peoples?" Close enough to touch the horse's neck, she felt its skin twitch, but it didn't pull away. Instead, it lowered its head, blowing softly, a sign of acceptance. Only then did Ayanna reach for Sarah Martinez. The trembling girl allowed herself to be lifted and carried to safety. Alina Martinez rushed forward to claim her daughter, tears streaming. "Gracias," Alina whispered. "You saved her life." But the other townspeople backed away. Their faces showed not gratitude, but renewed suspicion and fear. What they'd witnessed didn't look like horsemanship, looked like magic. "Did you see that?" Martha Stevens whispered. "She just ... talked to it, like casting a spell." "Witchcraft," someone muttered, plain as day. Jacob Mueller stepped forward, arms crossed. "That wasn't natural. No woman should be able to calm a wild horse like that." "She's Apache," Sheriff Brennan said dismissively. "They have their ways with horses, but the damage was done." The little girl's rescue had confirmed their worst suspicions about her otherworldly abilities. Samuel appeared, having run from the church. He took in the scene quickly: the trembling child, the nervous horse, the circle of hostile faces surrounding Ayanna. "What happened here?" he demanded. "Your pet, which just proved what she really is," Martha Stevens said sharply. "No Christian woman could do what she just did." Alina Martinez stepped forward, clearly terrified, but overcome by love for her daughter. She saved Sarah's life. "My daughter would be dead if not for her courage." "Courage," Jacob Mueller laughed harshly. "That was devil magic. She put a spell on that horse." "I've been around horses my entire life," Ayanna said quietly. "My people taught me to understand them. There's nothing supernatural about it. Nothing supernatural." Martha stepped closer, eyes blazing. "You commanded that beast like its master. That's witchcraft." The crowd closed in, their anger hotter and more certain. Samuel moved to stand beside Ayanna, a barrier between her and the mob. "This woman just risked her life to save a child. Over a coward any day." His words hit like a slap. But Martha Stevens was beyond reason, driven by grief and a need for someone to blame. "You're bewitched too," she shrieked. "She's cast her spell on you." "My Christian duty," Samuel replied, dangerously quiet, "is to protect the innocent and defend the defenseless. Seems I'm the only one here actually practicing Christianity." Sheriff Brennan cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Reverend, folks are upset. Maybe the girl should move on." "She stays," Samuel said flatly, "under the protection of the church. The church's protection won't mean much if the church burns down." Jacob Mueller said ominously, "Accidents happen in this dry climate." The threat hung in the air. Samuel's face went pale, but his voice remained steady. "Is that what we've come to? Threatening to burn down the house of God? Fire seems to follow." Her around, Mueller continued. "I'll go," Ayanna said quietly. "I don't want to bring trouble to the church." "No." Samuel's response was immediate. "You're not going anywhere. This is still my church, my decision. You want to threaten the church? Fine, but this building represents the only thing standing between this community and complete moral darkness. Burn it down, and you burn down any pretense that you're civilized people." "You're choosing her over us," Martha said, voice breaking. "Over your own congregation. I'm choosing what's right over what's easy," Samuel replied. "If that costs me my congregation, then maybe it wasn't worth having." The words fell like stones. The crowd began to disperse, muttering angrily among themselves. Alina Martinez approached Ayanna one last time, pressing something small into her hand, a wooden cross, roughly carved but beautiful. "For luck," Alina whispered. "My grandmother made it. She said it protects against evil." Ayanna closed her fingers around the cross. Alina wasn't offering protection against Ayanna's supposed powers. She was offering protection against the evil. Surrounding them both, as Alina hurried away, Samuel and Ayanna stood alone in the dusty street. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, but there was a chill in the air. "You shouldn't have done that," Ayanna said finally. "Defended me like that. They'll never forgive you." Samuel watched the last of the crowd disappear. "Something you can earn by abandoning your principles. If they can't accept me standing up for what's right, then their forgiveness isn't worth having." As they walked back to the church, Ayanna fingered the small cross, had wandered off into the desert, wild and free again. But the horse's brief moment of trust had changed everything, proving that some bridges between different worlds could be crossed. Whether that bridge would lead to understanding or destruction remained to be seen. The attack came. 3 nights later, when the desert wind howled and the moon hid behind racing clouds, Ayanna woke to smoke and breaking glass, her body instantly alert from years of sleeping with one ear, listening for danger. The church windows blazed with kerosene fire. Through the flames, she saw at least a dozen silhouettesmen with bandanas, hiding their faces but their intentions crystal clear. "Samuel," she called, rushing to his quarters. She found him pulling on boots, reaching for his rifle. "How many?" he asked. "Too many to fight." "We need to run, no." Samuel's voice was certain. "This is God's house. I won't abandon it to cowards and fire." Outside, voices shouted crude taunts and demands they surrender the witch. Jacob Mueller's voice, and Sheriff Brennan's too, though the lawmen seemed to be arguing rather than leading. "They'll kill you," Ayanna said desperately. "This isn't worth dying for." Samuel looked at her, his eyes holding a piece she didn't understand. "Some things are worth dying for. Standing between innocent people and evil is one of them." He moved toward the door, and Ayanna realized he meant to face the mob alone. She couldn't let that happen. Before Samuel could reach the door, Ayanna slipped past him and stepped into the courtyard alone. The mob fell silent at the sudden appearance of, "There, Quarry, I'm here," she called out. "You want me, not him. Let's finish this." Martha Stevens detached from the group, her face terrible in the torchlight. Finally, you show your true face." "This is my true face," Ayanna replied calmly. "The same one that's been here for weeks, helping tend your sick and caring. For your children, lies." Jacob Mueller stepped forward. "You're a witch, and everyone knows it. That business with the horse proved it." "The horse responded to kindness and understanding," Ayanna said. "The same things you could learn if you weren't so determined to choose hatred instead." Samuel emerged to stand beside her, rifle ready. Sheriff Brennan called out reluctantly, "Stand aside, preacher. The town wants justice." Justice Samuel's laugh was bitter. "You call this justice? A mob in the night, burning down a church to get to one unarmed woman." "She's not unarmed," Martha shrieked. "She has the devil's power. She's cursed this town." "Only curse on this town," Samuel replied, "is the curse of your own hatred and fear." Some men shifted uncomfortably. Mueller roared, "Look around you. Fire follows her wherever she goes. Dry wood, spilled kerosene, careless flames. None require magic, just human foolishness." "Then explain the horse," Martha demanded. Ayanna made a decision that would either save them all or destroy her completely. "You want to know how I calmed the horse? I'll show you." From the shadows, the same Mustang stepped into the courtyard. The mob backed away, raising weapons. But Ayanna walked slowly toward the horse, her voice dropping into ancient Apache rhythms. "You see how he comes to me," she called. "Not because of magic, but because I speak his language, because I understand what he needs." She touched the horse's neck, whispering words that sounded like wind through canyons. "My grandmother taught me that all living things have their own language. Is not witchcraft. This is knowledge passed down through generations." The Mustang wandered back into darkness, leaving uncertainty in the men's faces. But Martha remained unmoved. "Pretty words," Martha said bitterly. "But words won't bring back my boy." "No," Ayanna agreed quietly. "Nothing will. Me won't heal your pain either. It will only create more loss, more mothers grieving for their children." She gestured to the burning church. "Look what your need for revenge has cost you. Your place of worship is burning. How many more good things will you destroy?" Sheriff Brennan stepped forward. "She's got a point, Martha. This has gone too far. My boy is dead." Martha's voice cracked. "Burned alive because of her curse." "Your boy is dead because of an accident," Samuel said firmly. "Turning yourself into someone who burns churches won't honor his memory." Martha's face crumpled, rage giving way to raw grief. "He was only 8 years old, my baby boy, and he died alone." Ayanna felt her throat tighten with sympathy. Without thinking, she stepped toward the grieving mother. You lost family too." "Everyone," Ayanna replied simply. "I was the only one who escaped, and for years I wished I hadn't." Martha's tears flowed freely. "How do you bear it? How do you keep living when everything you loved is gone?" Ayanna glanced at Samuel. "You find new things to love, new people to care about. The pain never goes away, but it changes from something that destroys to something that teaches you to value what remains." Jacob Mueller stepped forward in disgust. "Enough, she's still a witch." He raised his torch to hurl it, but Sheriff Brennan caught his arm. "Mueller, stop! Can't you see what's happening here?" "Knowledge is knowledge," Ayanna told the crowd, challenging their fear with reason. She reminded them that she had saved a child using what she knew, asking them which was truly the act of evil. Her words cracked the mob's unity. Then Elena Martinez stepped forward with her daughter Sarah, boldly defending Ayanna. Sarah offered Ayanna wildflowers and thanked her for saving her. That simple act of gratitude from a child melted what remained. Of the mob's hostility, ashamed, the men stepped back. Sheriff Brennan dispersed the crowd, while Mueller tried one last threat. But no one listened. The hate had lost its grip. Samuel, humbled, asked Ayanna how she had known what to say. She answered gently, "Pain recognizes pain. And sometimes, that's the first step toward healing." As they began cleaning the church, the wild Mustang appeared again, watching quietly before vanishing into the desert, perhaps leaving behind a blessing. The immediate danger had passed. Apache woman and a white preacher could build a life together in a world that still wanted them apart. The desert wind carried the scent of sage and something new. For the first time since the fire, Ayanna allowed herself to hope that home could be something created, not just something lost, above them. The stars turned silently as the night waited to see what the dawn would bring to the small church. On the hillland, the two souls who had chosen to make it their sanctuary